Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is Daily Drop number 218. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Survivors Compensation Fund that was just approved and is set to go into effect on June 15th. There's a new article out from law.com, and they usually have a pretty good perspective on things like this, and they usually add some context to the story. So we read the article from the Daily Mail, and we got the basics of the story, right? We got an idea of what was going on, but of course we always want to add some context whenever possible. And law.com usually does a pretty good job of that. So that's why I decided to go ahead and continue covering this story for tonight's episode and continue to add a little bit more context so that we can understand exactly what's going on down there. So like I said, this article is from law.com, and the headline is Epstein Victim Compensation Fund Approved by Virgin Islands Judge. And the author of the article is Tom McParland. A compensation fund for the survivors of accused sex trafficker, pedophile, Jeffrey Epstein is set to go into effect as early as June 15th after a judge in the U.S. Virgin Islands approved the program earlier this week. And we talked about that, obviously. It's moving at a rapid pace, much quicker than I thought it was going to move. You know, there were some people talking about decades before this kicked in. So to see it start moving in a positive direction and to see the estate start to take responsibility for what Jeffrey Epstein did, it's certainly a positive development. The fund, which was proposed in response to dozens of lawsuits by Epstein's accusers, would free up hundreds of millions of dollars from the deceased financier, pedophiles, Virgin Island estates to settle claims out of court following Epstein's suicide, allegedly, while awaiting trial in Manhattan federal court. And it's important that all of this money goes to the survivors. I don't want to see this money getting pieced off to anybody else. The only people who should get any of this is the survivors. And how they divvy that up, well, I'll leave that to the lawyers, right? That's up to whatever the process is. But what I will tell you is this, as an outsider looking in, I think it's super important that all of that money goes to these survivors. The protocols for the claims process, which were finalized within the past week, allow survivors to submit a claim to Administrator Jordana Feldman, who will then review the application and make a proposed settlement offer, said attorney David Boies, whose firm represents 5 Epstein survivors in the Southern District of New York. Now, we didn't hear from David Boies in the other articles, right? We didn't get, a comment from the survivors' lawyers. We heard from one of the lawyers, I believe Jordan Merston, had a comment, a very small comment, but it's interesting to hear from David Boies as well, considering the role he's playing in this case and how in front his firm is when it comes to representing these survivors. So right away, we're hearing from David Boies in this article, and that's adding a little bit more context, of course, than we had yesterday. So you see why I try to chain these articles together sometimes when they add more context. So hearing from David Boies, the guy that's been negotiating this, it's definitely a good addition to the story, right? Adds a little bit more. The offer cannot be withdrawn by the estate, though survivors participating in the claims process would have the option of whether to accept the settlement, he said. And that's significant. It's important that the survivors are in control of this process. It's important that the girls who the estate has now acknowledged were abused by Jeffrey Epstein are in control of their own fate. They've spent way too long with their fate in other people's hands. And way too many times, those people who were supposed to be in a position of power or in a position where they could defend these girls have let them down. So it's time for them to take their fate into their own hands. So I like this a lot. Let them choose what they want to do. Let them choose if they want to accept the settlement or if they want to pursue it further in court, whatever it may be. But the option should always be theirs. In exchange, survivors would relinquish all claims against Epstein's estate, as well as any of its agents or employees. Those releases, however, would not apply to any alleged participant in Epstein's sex trafficking scheme. If a survivor declines the offer, she would still be able to pursue her claims in court, said Boies, chairman and managing partner of Boies, Schiller, and Flexner. So if, say, one of the survivors takes a look at what the settlement's offering her, and she does not believe that that's the right amount of money and she's being compensated fairly, or she wants to pursue other avenues as far as other people tied to the case goes, then she certainly has that ability. They are not forced to take part in this fund. So this is a completely voluntary fund, and there's no... they're not compelled to take part in it. And if they choose to litigate and go to court, then that's exactly what will occur. But I think it's a good option. Like I was saying, it's a good option for the survivors to have this as a way for them to begin repairing their lives, right? Some of them might not want to go through a whole entire legal battle and the rigmarole of, jumping through the loopholes and battling it out with these high-profile attorneys of the estate, et cetera, et cetera. And some people, they might be fatigued, right? They might decide, hey, look, this compensation fund is where it's at. I'm going to get my money and I'm going to split and I'm going to start my life over. And then there's other survivors who might say, hey, you know what? I don't like this. The amount that was offered to me, I don't feel that it is compensation enough for the pain and suffering that I've went through at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein. So I'm going to take this to court and we're going to litigate this, and I'm going to look for the number that I think fits the crime. So we might see that, right? I don't know one way or the other. I have no inside information on what any of these survivors are thinking. So they're going to do whatever is best for them, and that's exactly what I hope they do, because for far too long, nobody's looked out for them. So now that there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and, there's options starting to open up for them, I'm really glad that they're going to have the ability to choose their own fate here. It's potentially quite a favorable process for the survivors in the sense that the survivor's right to go to court is protected, Boies said in an interview Thursday. I think it is likely that all of our plaintiffs in the Southern District would go through the claims process, he said. And I hope that every single dollar is paid out to these girls. I mean, all you have to do is listen to the pain and the anguish in their voices in the Netflix documentary, and you understand the ramifications. You understand the burden that has been shouldered by these young ladies. It's heartbreaking. It is absolutely heartbreaking what they went through. Does getting a financial determination in your favor make everything right? Is it complete justice? No, it is not. But it is the estate acknowledging that Jeffrey Epstein abused and molested these girls. It's a huge point. It is a huge point that I'm going to keep driving home because it's a big victory. It really is a big victory as far as the pursuit of justice. This is them capitulating in the civil portion of these cases. This is them bending the knee and saying, we know that the estate is in the wrong. No need to litigate it. We'll just pay you out because we know that the estate was in the wrong. And that's definitely a positive from where we were just a handful of months ago to where we're at now. To think that these survivors can start getting some money sent their way and they can start rebuilding their lives and doing it, whatever it is they choose to do. Well, I think that's definitely a good thing, and I definitely agree with David Boies that this could turn out to be very, very good for the survivors, especially considering that they can still criminally go after the perpetrators and the co-conspirators and continue to help see justice be served. An attorney for Epstein's estate told a Manhattan federal magistrate judge in February that while the program initially gained little traction among plaintiffs, the vast majority have since come around on the idea, which he said won almost uniform support among the survivors. And I could see why it would. Right? The fatigue must be great. And to see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel here, if I was one of these survivors and, I was looking at the big picture here, I would definitely be clapping about the progress and happy about the progress made. And really, it's the progress has all been made because of the courage of these survivors to come forward and say, you know what, enough is enough. We will no longer live in the shadows. We will no longer have our voices stepped on by the legacy media. We're going to end around all of you, and we're going to take it straight to the people via social media. And that is exactly what occurred. That is exactly how this has gained steam and how it's gained traction. And the survivors have earned every last bit of this justice, folks. Every last bit of it. And again, it's just a little taste. Indictments and prosecutions, that's when a bow is tied on this package. Until then, we'll keep chipping away at the rot, right? But we have to take the time to take a look around and say to ourselves, all right, well, we've made some good progress here. The survivors are going to start getting a little bit of a little bit of a nod in their direction from the system, acknowledging what they went through. And we see what has occurred with a lot of Epstein's buddies, them having to leave, public life, and Andrew, et cetera, et cetera. So things are moving in the right direction, especially now in the civil portion of this case, according to David Boies, and I'm inclined to believe what he has to say, considering he is the lawyer for these survivors and would know how they feel, that if the survivors are feeling good about this fund, then that's good enough for me. Right? It's all about them and what they feel like they have coming their way because of the abuse by Jeffrey Epstein. And if they've sat down with their lawyers and they feel like this is the proper direction for them to go, then I am super happy that this is cracking off and that they're going to be able to start, at the very least, putting a little bit of this behind them. The status of the fund, however, had remained in limbo after U.S. Virgin Islands Attorney General Denise George in January hit the estate with liens for alleged criminal activity, freezing all of its assets, including an account used to fund its regular operations. And that was a pretty shrewd move on Denise George's part, in my opinion. I think that the pressure of her opening up these investigations and dropping liens on them the way she did kind of spurred them into action and made them understand that there was no more time to drag their feet and that their usual tactics were not going to work anymore. So I think it was a pretty shrewd move on Denise George's part, and I think she deserves some credit for getting this moving in the right direction. And again, that still doesn't mean I'm not skeptical of her desire to paint the Virgin Islands as some sort of victim of Jeffrey Epstein, because that is not the case. But as far as this goes, I think she's doing a really good job when it comes to this portion. On Tuesday, Magistrate Judge Carolyn P. Herman Purcell of the Virgin Islands Superior Court in St. Thomas and St. John said that all interested parties there had finalized the program's protocols, clearing the way for it to proceed. In a footnote, Herman Purcell said that George had reached an agreement with the estate to promptly lift the liens in order to pay amounts owed for the program and to begin funding the program's active operations, including payments of compensation determinations to eligible claimants. So it sounds to me like everything is moving very rapidly. And I would have to believe that they have their vetting process, I guess you would call it, as a fund locked in and ready to go, and they're going to be able to process these claims relatively quickly. So I'm very interested to keep following what goes on here and how it turns, because I believe that they have the infrastructure here to make sure that these payments get paid out quickly. Bennett Moskowitz, a Troutman Sanders partner who represents estate executors Darren Indyke and Richard Kahn, filed the order Wednesday in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. He did not return a call Thursday seeking comment on the fund. Boies said his firm had already submitted names and information for survivors, and the claims process for each survivor was expected to take a matter of weeks, not months. Perfect. Even better. See? And that's why I wanted to add this article. You see how much more information we've learned already just from the little bit we've heard from David Boies? And that's why I'm always so adamant about going directly to the source. Whenever we can go directly to the source and skip all the BS, it's always the best option. So I was relatively confident that we'd be able to add some context with this article. And it's been pretty good so far in that respect, because there's a lot of stuff here that we didn't know from the article last night. How it might take a matter of weeks, not months, etc., etc. So that's definitely good news. The protocol is set up, so the process should go relatively quickly, he said. There are quite a few claimants, but I think you will see many claims resolved over the next few months. Epstein, a prominent Manhattan and South Florida-based financier and gigantic, disgusting pedophile, was found dead in a secure housing unit of the Federal Metropolitan Correctional Center in August, after federal prosecutors charged him in an underage sex ring that preyed on women and girls as young as 14 years old. His death was later ruled a suicide by hanging, allegedly. Just days before he died, Epstein filed his will in the U.S. Virgin Islands and placed Indike and Kahn, his longtime corporate attorneys, as the heads of his estate. The move was seen as complicating a host of civil cases seeking to recover money from his personal finances and shadowy business network that was alleged to have enabled his abuses. While his death in federal custody ended the criminal case against him, a criminal investigation of Epstein's associates remains ongoing. And I think that's another important part down there at the bottom. When getting some corroboration here from law.com that there is a criminal investigation ongoing into Jeffrey Epstein's associates. Law.com has sources. They know what's going on. They have their finger on the pulse, especially in New York, when it comes to the legal system and the cases that are making their way through the court docket. So anytime I can get an article from law.com on one of these topics, I think it's a pretty good addition to the catalog. So you see, folks, it's starting to move, right? They're starting to get a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel for these survivors. And, you know, it's not complete and utter victory for them, and it's not complete closure for a lot of them. But what it is, it's a step in the right direction. And I think the most important part that we could take out of all of this, at least in my opinion, what I take out of this, and I find to be the most important part, is the acknowledgement of wrongdoing by the estate and by Epstein. I think that is so huge to put a stamp on this. Moving forward, as we enter into the criminal aspect of this case, we'll be able to look back and say, all right, well, stamp that civil case. The survivors got that victory. And now the only thing missing are these people being prosecuted and perp-walked for their crimes. And when that happens, well, I'll tell you what, folks, that'll be the day, huh? That'll be something. The day we see Ghislaine Maxwell slapped in bracelets and perp-walked will be the day that your buddy here, Bobby, will pop a bottle on the air and drink it. I don't even drink, but that's the kind of celebration I'll be ready for, because it's time. It is time for these people to pay the price for their crimes. They've operated in the shadows for far too long. They've operated within the darkness for far too long. And now that the shade has been pulled open and the curtain has been removed and the sunlight has begun to spill in, they're scurrying like the cockroaches they are. But this time, they're not going to have anybody in the legacy media covering for them. This time, they don't have any friends that are going to give them a immunity deal that covers all of them. All they have this time is the thought of a very, very long time in prison, just as soon as Berman decides to do his job. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI at protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All right, everybody, I'll be back tomorrow with our usual morning update, and we'll keep it going. I hope all of you have a great night.